Good afternoon, collectors and friends. Welcome to another edition of Trading Card Therapy, episode number 83. We have a fantastic guest in store for today's show. It is Rich Mueller, owner and proprietor of sportscollectorsdaily.com. So stay tuned. We're going to bring him on in just a couple of minutes. To start off the show, I wanted to share with you a couple of trades that I recently made. The first one, I was reached out to by a member of the vintagebreaks.com community, and they said that they saw this 1950 Bowman Jackie Robinson in my Just Collect eBay store. Now, if you're interested in checking out my eBay store, you can do so at just_collect as the user name on ebay.com. So anyway, Bradley said he's been looking for a 1950 Bowman Jackie Robinson, and you'd say for a 1.5, this has really nice eye appeal. And for those of you that typically just listen to Trading Card Therapy, our podcast, if you'd like to actually watch the video so you can check out some of the cards we're talking about and showing off on these episodes, you can do that at our Just Collect YouTube channel. So he reached out, said he was working on completing a Jackie Robinson complete player run. He needed this as well as a 1952 Topps. He also liked this Hank Aaron card that was in our eBay store. And normally when folks are offering me trades, they're not necessarily offering up cards that are worth more than the best card that they're looking to get. But in this case, he was actually willing to trade a really sharp, slightly off-center left to right, but a really sharp 1979 Topps Wayne Gretzky rookie, graded SGC 8. So we did a deal, and I got this card. I traded him the Jackie, the Aaron, and I believe a $750 break credit to vintagebreaks.com is what he was looking for. So he was happy. And the other trade that I wanted to show off today on Trading Card Therapy is something that another member of our Vintage Breaks community was targeting this beauty in our Just Collect eBay store. This Christy Mathewson was recently graded, came from a long-time collection. You could read the full story about this collection and many others on our blog at blog.justcollect.com. We call this the Tower Trade because Jim traded us dozens of vintage graded cards. Every card was $100 or less, in some cases 10 or 15 bucks. And he put it all towards this beauty. If you want to see the actual tower of cards, you can do that on my Instagram account, Leighton_Sheldon. So those are the two trades that I wanted to show off to start today's show. Now I am going to bring on Rich Mueller from Sports Collectors Daily. Hey, Rich, how are you today?
I'm doing okay. I was just enjoying your trade discussion there. That was fascinating stuff. All kinds of things going on behind the scenes there.
Yeah, you know, the trades are fun, Rich, and I'm sure you probably did the same as a kid because we all did trades as a kid. And let's be candid, right? The reason why we generally did it is because we had something that we weren't necessarily in love with, and someone else had something that we really preferred versus what we had. And, you know, of course, when we were younger, the trades might have been for a lot less money. But as the industry has certainly come a long way, prices have come a long way. It's not as easy, I find, Rich, to trade as it was, of course, when I was a 15-year-old kid. So, for example, on that Wayne Gretzky rookie I showed off, I was really impressed that when Brad reached out, he didn't just covet a nice card from our store, but he actually offered of something really of value. So I appreciated that. And the other trade, I specifically wanted to do a favor for Jim. You know, Jim's been part of our Vintage Breaks community for a while, and he did target that Christy Mathewson. And I said, you know, I could kind of use some of this cheaper inventory anyway. And instead of me going out and buying it, Rich, what if I could help Jim turn all of these, like, you know, sub $100 cards, which he doesn't really want anyway in his collection, and turn it into that card without having to spend a few $1,000s? Everyone kind of came out a winner there. And so that was what really nice about both of those trades is I felt that all the parties were happy, not just kind of one side.
Yeah, it's kind of become a little bit of a lost art. So it's, you know, I think there's goodwill behind that too. I see dealers at shows sometimes, and people will come up to him, and a lot of times it's little kids, and they'll want to make a trade. And maybe it's not quite something he would normally do, but the guys who do that, not only do they earn the goodwill of the kid, but people that are around that see that might be more apt to buy from that guy, But it's fun to do that kind of thing where no money changes hands. It's been a long time since I made a trade.
Well, I would say, Rich, maybe we should make a trade. So I'm going to challenge you. We'll put it on social media. Yeah, maybe not in the middle of the show, but I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you, because I know I can call your wife and she's going to tell me 6 different things she wants out of the house. So I won't do that to you, but I would encourage you, and to be fair, others who might be listening to the show after it airs, do yourself a favor. You don't have to trade with me, although I'd love to trade with you. Do yourself a favor. Do some winter cleaning, right? Get ready for the spring, and really just get a little like shoebox and start putting in, even if it's just single cards. It could be a card that's $3. It could be a card that's $12. But what's going to happen before you know it, you might have a pile of 10 or 20 or a few dozen cards. And you're like, and this is what happens, Rich. Well, that pile of cards, although I don't really care about it that much, it's kind of a pain to turn into money. And so that is when it becomes a wonderful thing where if you can find a match, whether it be it's a local card store owner or a local collector, or to be fair, going to like a bigger convention in your area. Yeah. I think that was, to me, Rich, when I was really young, that was the most fun about trading, was like, hey, I'm literally getting rid of, and remember, those were the days of no eBay, AOL message boards had just started. Point is, it wasn't that easy to get rid of $150 of unwanted cards.
Yeah, that was and it was kind of a shot in the dark sometimes to know whether that other person might have something you need, but sometimes you'd be surprised. They'd come up with something you never would have expected. Like, wow, I'd really like to have that.
Well, it's funny because I'm kind of perusing your room with like my, subliminal baseball card, hunter in me here that's looking. I'm like, Rich, I bet you within 5 minutes I could pick out a bunch of things in your house or your office there that I'd be happy to trade you for.
Yeah, those boxes over here, they're not full, unfortunately. They go on for a while, so you can see.
But here's the thing, though. I can dream. I like that, Rich. You're like just over the shoulder.
Yeah, that's I've got display boxes that are going back to the 40s and 50s, but there's nothing inside them. They're fun to look at. They're kind of like your wall of wax from the National with the unopened display, or the open shipping cases. That's kind of what I've got here.
It's funny, and then I'm going to take a minute to formally introduce you to the community. Rich, it's amazing because all these years later, right, you and I have crossed paths with Honus Wagner's, with 52 Topps Mickey Mantles, some very famous collectors. And I would say there's 2 things that every National is still a very popular thing for people to talk to me about. And the first is exactly what you just mentioned. So a number of years ago, it might have been Chicago. We took a huge box truck, and I had this idea. We didn't sell a single one of these empty display shipping cases from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. But as Rich called it, it was a wall of wax, but not in the way that you would think of like Steve Hart having a wall of wax from Baseball Card Exchange. This was literally a wall that was built out of dozens of unique shipping baseball, football, basketball, and hockey card containers, mostly from Topps, but visually was an incredible display. And what's amazing, Rich, is at this point, it was many years ago, I still get asked about it. Like, am I going to bring it back?
Yeah.
And believe me, I would like to. At this point, they're in storage, I'm ashamed to say, because I like looking at them.
Well, if anybody out there is wondering what the heck we're talking about, if you go to Sports Collectors Daily and you search for Just Collect display cases or shipping cases, I can't remember how I referred to it, National Sports Collectors Convention, just put that in the search box or something like that, and you'll come up with the story and the video. I think the
video's done quite well. The video's like embedded.
Yeah, we embedded the video. Yeah, and you gave us a tour of all the different cases that you had, and some of them are one of a kind. I mean, really cool. I saw 1965 shipping case, and I know you had one there. Topps baseball shipping case. It's the one that has the caricatures of Koufax and Mantle and Killebrew on the front. There's one on eBay right now. I don't think it's you selling it. No. It was $25,000, which that's a little pricey, but still, I mean,
I tell you, Rich, if that's what they're worth, I'm going to storage right after.
I was going to say you got to pipe up the insurance on the storage unit.
Oh, my goodness. All right. Well, listen, let's take a step back for a minute. I want to make sure that I introduce you properly. Rich is not only a longtime friend of mine, but more importantly, he is an instrumental man in the hobby. Many call him the voice of the hobby. Sportscollectorsdaily.com is the news source that I go to every single day, 7 days a week, year round, to make sure that I have my ears and eyes to the ground, Rich. So I'm always watching you. And, the joking aside, it really is a site that I frequent almost daily. And what's amazing is even these years later, Rich, you're still plugging away. You're still producing incredible content. And so with that groundwork, laid right in front of us, thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate it.
Hey, always glad to do it. And it's been a long time since we started. I was thinking the other day, I think now we have 18,000 different articles on there. Back in the beginning, back in 2006, when nobody was hardly doing anything, it wasn't much, but we've had some really nice stories over the years, some involving what you guys have come up with. And of course, everything from these great cards that are found to licensing issues and crime and you name it. I've written about it over the years, and luckily there's been enough every day, Monday through Friday, to come up with stories that we can put out there. It's 4 a day times how many years is that? I don't know how many words that is, but it's millions and millions of words. But it's been a great ride, great fun, and so much has happened in those 16 years in the hobby. And it's kind of fun on one hand, just to be able to kind of be in there writing about it, because it helps me understand what's happened, just as a collector myself, to be able to be kind of at the forefront of it and understand, the changes that have happened in the hobby. Because I think sometimes people that have come in the last couple of years, they're not quite as, knowledgeable when it comes to things that happened before they got into it or got back into it. And hopefully, some of our content can help them do that and regardless of what they're looking for, and they can kind of see that things were a lot different 18 years. In some ways they were the same, shows are shows, and eBay was around then, and you guys were at it, but it's, there have been a monumental amount of changes just in the last, since COVID, I guess is the easy way to put it. But even before that, a little bit, it was starting to change. But it's kind of ever evolving, and at the same time, what's kind of at the root of it all is just everybody loves to collect cardboard. That hasn't changed, and the vibe around what makes people excited, why people do it, why we continue to bring new people in is the same as it's always been, and that's kind of a love of sports, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, it's probably, it's deeper than the love of sports. I think, for many of us that are, starting to look back at our childhood being a few decades ago, we're reconnecting with our childhood. But I want to bring up something that has never changed. And I want to make sure that our audience who maybe is meeting you for the first time, Rich, and potentially even hearing about sportscollectorsdaily.com for the first time, is that even though much has changed in 18 years or 20 years or so, since, we've known each other and been friends, and especially on your site, something that's never changed, it is free to access the content on sportscollectorsdaily.com. And Rich, that's not something that I take lightly, as have been around for a long time. And I want folks to really kind of take a minute to understand, you're self-funded, right? You're a for-profit organization. But that being said, you're covering the news, and you're trying to do so in a way that, of course, is unbiased and also is going to be fast, because, I think, these days there's maybe a few other places that are starting to kind of get into that media and that news coverage of our space. But Rich, that's something that I'm so grateful to you for, in your organization, is well before the boom of COVID, okay? Kind of like what you were saying, a number of things have changed, but a lot hasn't. However, even through all of this tumultuous activity, you've been the constant, covering it for free. And so I want to make sure that, from our podcast today, that folks give your website a chance and they check it out. Because if you go on a Monday and then you go the following Monday to your site, and that's what's so beautiful, you of course are going to see the legacy articles a week later, but every single week there is fresh, new, newsworthy, hobby content, and it could literally be anything and everything, as you said, from crime all the way to, Josh Luber's coming out with not even know what these things are, robots or, dolls or something. But it's been fascinating to watch kind of the hobby unfold through the years, Rich, through the lens of Sports Collectors Daily.
Well, the good thing about it being free is that if you hate it, it's not costing you anything. You just go to another website that you like better, I guess. That's the easy way to do it. It's this is kind of the 1 week a year where I sort of take a little bit of time off, as everybody else hopefully does toward the end of the week. But yeah, 52 weeks a year, we're at it doing stories, and I have some really good freelancers that help me out a little bit too that contribute things. But it's been I think back of so many changes, not just in the landscape of the hobby, but also when I started, nobody was writing about this. And that's one of the reasons why I started it, was because I had a news background, having worked in television news for a long time. And I just thought it was there was kind of a need. I thought it could support a daily website because things were happening so fast. Even back then, there were auctions and all these things starting up. And that's back in 2006, which ironically is the last time the National Sports Collectors Convention was on the West Coast. That tells you how long ago it was. I just thought at that time, let's give it a shot, because I think there's enough out here as an industry that, or hobby, whatever you want to call it. Some people hate the word industry, but and luckily, we've never run out of stuff to write about, and I think I've kept it fairly on topic. We haven't branched out to do, Pokemon stuff. And if you want that, great. I'm not criticizing Pokemon collectors, but we've stuck to sports. We've stuck to sports collectibles, and there's stories everywhere. Whether it's and we've talked about the different things that we cover, but it's some days are a challenge to find things, because that's just kind of the nature of the news business. Some days are diamonds and some days are stones, they say. But luckily enough, I think people have found enough interesting things on a regular basis to keep coming back. So that's the nice thing. But yeah, it's I've kept it free, and that helps us with search engine rankings, things that are behind paywalls. I know it's frustrating when I'm looking for a story and it's maybe on a newspaper somewhere, and they have a paywall and they want you to subscribe for $1 for 6 months or whatever, which is easy enough, but then you got to remember to cancel it. So we just decided to keep it free. It's advertiser supported. And so that's the way it is, and hopefully that's the way it's always going to be.
Well, I hope so too, for the hobby's sake, Rich. I did want to touch upon, even though we didn't exactly go in order, you didn't mention that you have a background in TV, and so yeah. I'd like to give you a moment to kind of tell folks a little bit about your journey, how you basically got to at least starting Sports Collectors Daily. And I know you just alluded to it just a little bit, but I find your story fascinating. I think some others might as well.
Yeah, I went to school to get into broadcast journalism and did that. I started out doing play-by-play in the CBA, the original CBA, back in the day when Phil Jackson was the coach of the Albany Patroons and not the Chicago Bulls.
Oh, wow.
Actually gave Phil a ride from the airport and a couple of guys on the team to our home base back in the day. Don't remember much about it, unfortunately, but Hubie Brown was coaching, and George Karl and Campy Russell was still playing. But anyway, that was my first
Hubie
job.
just retired at 91. Do you see? Hubie retired. Hubie Brown just retired.
Yeah. That was. I'm sorry. It wasn't Hubie Brown. It was Herb Brown, his brother,
okay.
Who was coaching back then. But yeah, they were. Herb was the coach of one of the teams in the league. But then after a year, I got into local television news and worked in several different markets all over the country. But I've always been a collector. Always had fun in my off hours. Just, I'm kind of an old school vintage guy. I collect vintage cards, dabble a little bit sometimes in the modern stuff, but not much. I've had to really know it and stay close to it because of what I do. But back in 2006, I was just kind of looking to kind of plot out a future, because the television news business was becoming a really young person's game in a lot of ways, and it can be very stressful. And even if you're doing sports, which I was until the last few years, I was just kind of looking for something to do that I enjoyed a little more. And I thought, hey, there's no real daily news outlet for the sports memorabilia industry. You know, at the time, you had to, something happened, you would have to wait 2 weeks to read it in a hobby publication, you know, and I just saw the challenge, or the change that was happening in media from print to digital. You know, it was pretty obvious even at that point that that's where it was all going. So I didn't know anything about starting a website. I was familiar with the web and everything, but I didn't know anything about how to do it. So I got connected with a local guy who's actually kind of become my guru through all this. Anytime that I was having second thoughts about it in the early days, he kind of talked me down and said, "You're doing all right, keep going." And so I did. And I was still doing work in broadcasting at the time, full time. So I kind of had two.
Oh, I remember, Rich.
Yeah, I had 2 full-time jobs for a long time. And it was, luckily my wife and I didn't have any kids. And so I would come home from work at 11 o'clock at night, and I'd work till 2 a.m. And then I'd get up about 9 and I'd work till 11 or 12 doing the Sports Collectors Daily stuff. And occasionally when I was working on my job, if there was some downtime, I'm not ashamed to say that I actually hopped on and did a little extra work for myself. But I figure I gave the broadcast game enough of myself for a long time to where they could give me a little back. So, but I eventually it got to the point where, I figured that I could support myself by doing this full time. So back in, I guess it's been now almost 11 years ago, we went full time with it, and haven't looked back since. It's been great. And hopefully, we'll continue to get that support from advertisers and grow it's been a slow, growth over time, just kind of slow and steady, which is fine with me. I don't have any corporate backing right now. We're just kind of strictly, I own it, I run it. And so that's kind of always the way it's been. It's still a very small business, really. And, but it has a big, long reach. So I'm grateful for that, for, hammering away has kind of paid off all these years. And I hope that people get what they're looking for out of it. And even if they're just coming, like you said, just once a week to catch up on stories, that's great. It's there 24/7 whenever you want to look at it. And so that's kind of my backstory, and hopefully now kind of getting a little bit closer to retirement, unbelievably. So hopefully there'll be a smooth handoff somewhere down the line to somebody that can keep this alive and keep it going. And once I step away and kind of slow down a little bit, and that time is coming, but we'll see what happens.
Well, Rich, you should be very proud, and I know all of us in the hobby are extremely grateful for your efforts. And it's amazing. I remember those years ago when you were in that transition period, when you were doing both, and how hard you worked. And so it's really a testament to see where you are today. I'm curious, when you were collecting as a kid, what was one of your favorite issues? Like, which sets, was it?
The thing we all remember is opening the packs and tasting the gum, and if we're old enough to remember that, and I am certainly. And I think the favorite sets that I have kind of tie into those memories. I think when I was able to buy, cards with whatever little money you could scrape up. I love the 74 set, and you can't imagine the craziness that went through a little kid's. I wasn't little, but I was still not yet a teenager, and you opened the packs and you saw the Washington National League. And if we were baseball fans, we kind of got the, it wasn't a joke to Topps, but it was kind of a joke to collectors that, oops, the San Diego Padres weren't actually moving. And boy, Topps really screwed up by predicting that they would. And so that was kind of a lot of fun. And the thing I remember most about the 74 is that my dad and I went to local Kmart store. It was about a 15-minute ride away, and they had the baseball card vending machine in the lobby of the Kmart. You walk through the doors, and then there was a second set of doors, but between the doors there were vending machines, and they had one with baseball cards in it. And I saw 1974, and this is in April of 1974, I think, very early in April, maybe before the season started or just as it was getting started. And so I had a nickel in my pocket. It was a nickel, and you got 5 cards, put the nickel in, pulled the lever out, and out came 5 cards, and right on top was that 74 Hank Aaron with the all-time home run king on it. Again, Topps predicting that he was going to break the record, even though it hadn't quite happened yet. but it's such a cool looking card, and it was such a neat thing for that card to be the one that I pulled out. So I always remember that. And then 75 the next year, with so much going on. I was a big Lou Brock fan as a kid. Can tell you all kinds of stories about that. And I didn't live in Missouri or anywhere close to St. Louis, but when I was a kid, I was a Brock fan and a Cardinal fan. And he was, of course, approaching the stolen base record, and he was kind of on the way to 3,000 hits. And my favorite card is the 69 Topps Brock, which is also one of the first ones I ever pulled out as a pack, and I was a little kid then.
That's cool.
It's just a really neat, colorful card, and I think that's what kind of clicked in my brain as a little kid, and that's probably why at the time I was a Cardinal fan. I'm not anymore, but those two sets, 74 and 75, are probably my two favorites. But honestly, there are things in your mind as a collector that, and this is probably true for everybody, you remember certain things as a kid that kind of, I remember the 72 set because I went into a bakery with my mom and they had the high number packs, and I couldn't, because that's, we knew they were put out in series, but we didn't know how many series there were going to be. And so that was fun. And the 71 coins was another one. I bought a pack and I was like, what is this? And it was a baseball coin, which we all, of course, know now was the insert set in 71. But there's, and I could go to other years too, traveling with my parents to Washington, D.C. on a bus trip. And I was actually a teenager at that time, couldn't drive yet. So we were on this bus and stopped at a rest area or something. And they had this was a regular vending machine with candy in it, but they also had cards. And I had stopped collecting. You get into those teenage years and you kind of think about other things. But I bought I've stuck them. Again, I think it was 20 cents at the time, and I was able to get some 77 and 78 Topps baseball cards that kind of entertained me on the rest of the trip to Washington, D.C. So it's just all those little things, but those are probably my favorite sets, the ones I had as a kid. Certainly there have been tons and tons of cool sets since then, and the modern stuff is amazing what they do. Whether or not you're into autograph cards or relic cards or whatever, just the designs in the cards are phenomenal, and they have been since the 90s. So the 90s produced some of the greatest looking, coolest basketball cards ever. But yeah, I think it's just those are some of the things that I remember the most from growing up. Those are my favorites.
Great recollection. It really kind of gave me the goosebumps, Rich, to remember some of my childhood doing maybe similar things with my parents. In other words, they were going antiquing. I had no interest in going with them. And I remember, especially in the beginning, I would kind of, mosey on through the store or the gallery. And, my parents would ask me what I was doing. And I said, don't worry about me. I'm just kind of doing my thing. And inevitably, I would ask them if they had baseball cards. And of course, 98% of the time they would say no. But I'm curious if you remember this. As cards became a little more popular, you go into like some of these antique shops, and even though they weren't good cards, I'm like, Dad, I found cards. And they'd have, I guess it was like my first version of a grab bag I ever found. They would say, like, in a sandwich bag or a brown bag, mixture of old cards, $2. And he's like, you don't know what's in there. I'm like, I don't care. It's $2. What are you talking about? Right? I don't think you quite get it. I love cards. I have $2. I have no interest in being here, guys. So give me my $2.
Me a little bit. Yeah. Oh, that's funny.
Yeah. I'm curious because I had lots of other questions and not all day to keep you here, Rich. So one thing I wanted to know, and I'm sure I know the answer already, but did you keep anything closed? Like any of these packs you bought when you were a kid? Did you keep anything unopened?
No, I didn't. I opened everything. We could never have imagined how I know it breaks your heart. Breaks my heart, too, considering what was under my parents' pool table at one time when I did start saving unopened stuff.
Oh, my God.
But no, I opened it all up. We could never have imagined back then that, unopened packs would be something to hang on to. The purpose was to have the pack, was to open it up and see what was inside of it. Later on, I started putting stuff away, and you and I have talked about this before, but I started buying unopened back in the late 70s just because it was cool and it was fun, and it wasn't, the prices had not, obviously, because buying a box of 1970 Topps football in 1981 or so wasn't really that big a deal. There was value to it. The hobby had started to take off really in the late 70s. 78, 79 was kind of a big people talk about the COVID boom, and the junk wax boom, but there was a boom in the 70s too. And people talk about, stuff being expensive, now, but back then, unopened stuff, there was a market for it, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So a guy like me working part-time in college could afford to buy a box of 70 Topps football and stick it away. And yeah, I had put away a case of 79 Topps not rack packs, but the grocery trays, 192 of them. They were under my parents' pool table for years. And I'd open them up a few at a time, and I'd put the set together, and all of a sudden, then I sell some at a show, and eventually they dwindled down to nothing, and they were all opened up. Unfortunately, I did save one. I have one pack left. But I had 70. So I had a box of 76, a case of 76 Topps baseball. Saved those. I did sell off some of those, and but then I wound up with 3 or 4 boxes. This was in 1988, but I was getting ready to move from Wisconsin to California, and I needed money for an apartment and for the move out there. The company was paying part of it, but wanted to have a little bit of money so I didn't go out there broke. And so I took the 3 remaining boxes and sold them to a local card shop for what I thought at the time was a pretty fair price, but obviously I wouldn't have them back. But I do have the empty display case up here with it, so that's a consolation prize.
All right. When you have a consolation prize, but Rich, I do enjoy these stories so much, and
I probably told them to you about 6 times, but
well, not all of them. I heard
everybody else's. I heard some of them. So,
and by the way, folks, if you're watching this on YouTube and you want to share kind of your own story, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Something that you remember doing as a kid, which store you frequented, or who you were with when you were collecting, and then do you have a tale of woe like Rich? Meaning, did you have a case of 1976 Topps baseball at one point, and then poof, one day it was just gone?
Yeah.
But speaking of an open, Rich, I know that one of the coolest finds that kind of come to mind for me over the last 20 years or so was the beer box unopened find that you covered for sportscollectorsdaily.com. And so I'm curious, if it's not that story, what story really resonates for you? Let's just say 20 years is the number. Over the last 20 years, you're like, OMG, I cannot believe this. What story is it for you?
Yeah, I think that, and I've forgotten a lot of what I've written, honestly, over 18 years, but I think there's one that stands out for me, at least in the last 6 or 7 years, and that is the Uncle Jimmy collection. That wound up through Wheatland Auctions. I mean, it was just like your eyes popped out of your head, and to the point where you're almost like, is this real? But clearly the story as it unfolded, made it obvious that, yeah, it was real. It was just a guy who was a big baseball fan dating back to his youth in the 30s, and way ahead of his time when it comes to collecting. I mean, he was sending individual cards to players to have signed, and he kept notebooks recording exactly what he sent and what he got back, and kept them all in great shape in this house in New Jersey. And it was, I think it was New Jersey. Might have been. Was it New Jersey or Pennsylvania?
It was New Jersey. Yeah.
New Jersey. Okay. Yeah. And the family knew he was a collector and knew he had good stuff, but he wasn't the type to go to shows. He wasn't like actively involved in the hobby. And then he passed away, and the family went in and saw what he had and reached out to Wheatland, which is a really great company, a smaller company in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, that has a shop, but they also do run auctions. And they unveiled some of these things to us and to me, and autographed Babe Ruth cards that looked like they were just printed yesterday, and that he had stuck away. But he also had things that weren't of any kind of value, really. So he was just a true collector, who wound up with some amazing stuff. And he was very avid and wrote to, hundreds of players, I guess, back at the time, and used to go to games at Yankee Stadium. He would take public transportation and go. And we don't really know whether he got the autographs at the ballpark, and through the mail. I guess that's kind of the way it was he got some of them, the bulk of them, through the mail, where he'd write to players, because he'd always ask his family for stamps and envelopes at holiday time. And so they'd give him stamps and envelopes. And, but I'm sure when he went to the ballpark too, he may have come up with some autographs. But just a nice old guy who loved baseball and loved collecting, and just to see some of those things, you can go to our website and type in Uncle Jimmy collection. We did, I think, 7, 8, 9, 10 stories on it because it played out over the course of time. But the first story, before the cards were sold, was really the best because we saw this stuff for the first time, and it was just jaw dropping.
Yeah, it was mind-boggling. I'm getting goosebumps again as I relive it. As Rich said, if you want to find more information about the Uncle Jimmy signed Babe Ruth cards, signed Lou Gehrig cards, etc., you could do that at Rich's site, sportscollectorsdaily.com. Rich, I do think that takes the cake. I'm curious, do you believe, and the audience, I'd love to hear your opinion as well. Let me know in the comments. Do you think that there's another epic collection like the Uncle Jimmy collection out there, or like that great beer box find of unopened stuff? Do you think that there's another amazing find to be had out there?
Oh, absolutely. And we just had one. Somebody went to a flea market, or not a flea market, it was an estate sale in Virginia, about, just a short drive from where the American Tobacco Company had its cigarettes made back in the T206 era. And this estate sale had talk about shipping cases. This was, I don't know if you call it a shipping case or display case, only one we've ever seen of Piedmont cigarettes with some packs still inside. Some had been opened, but about an equal number had not been opened, still had the tax stamp on it. We don't know exactly what's in those because there were bird cards made that were put in packs. Of course, we all, as collectors of sports memorabilia, we think of the T206, and it's very possible that there are T206 cards in there, but no guarantee. So that's again, just a recent phenomenal find of stuff that you would never have expected. And it's fun to do what I do because I see these finds come to auction, and every time I hear somebody say, you listen to a dealer at the show, there's nothing out there anymore. Well, you're wrong. I mean, you're just flat out wrong. You got to go looking for it. But it's out there. And, the auction companies naturally now are kind of the ones that tend to bring this stuff to market because they're advertising and they're beating the bushes with, consignment directors who kind of know where to go in the weeds, and they're paying attention. But they're also getting calls from the public all the time, or emails. I've got this, and maybe 60-70% of it is nothing, but every once in a while you find something really, really special. And so they're the ones that are kind of bringing most of this stuff to market. But I see all the time, sports card dealers that come up with these collections, and then they wind up selling them on Whatnot or wherever it is. But yeah, I think, maybe not on the level of the Uncle. Well, I shouldn't say that because, we also had a find of a T206 Cobb with Cobb back that Mint State, Rick Snyder is the guy who owns that.
Yeah. REA just found the Babe Ruth rookies.
Exactly. Yeah. REA's Babe Ruth. And so there is stuff constantly coming out there. I think it's partly because the public, we always think, is so in tune with the value of collectibles when, a lot of people are not. They're going about their daily lives. It was something they were handed. They're not sports fans, or maybe they are sports fans, but they're like, okay, cool. Maybe they're not hurting for money, where they, come across something and immediately the first thought is to sell it. And that was the case with that Mid-State find of the Cobb with Cobb back. The family, I don't think, needed the money, so they just kind of hung on to it for a while until they were ready to sell it, and he got the call. So, I think there's always stuff out there waiting to be found, and that's what makes it fun, what makes it exciting, because those are the things on our website that are the most popular with our readers, are these stories from people finding great stuff. And luckily, every year we have a section at the end of the year in our year in review story that says it's about the great finds that have come through. And I never have a hard time finding stuff to put in there. It's always.
No, you're right. You make a great point, Rich, and we're honored to have made that list many times here at Select. If folks want to read about some of the collections that we find, for example, like the 1935 Gaudi uncut sheet find at Fanatics Fest recently. The story is on our blog at blog.justcollect.com. You covered it on your website, Rich, Sports Collectors Daily. And I concur. I think that it's going to be a challenge because there's a lot of competition for great stuff. But I think that as the market continues to mature, generations continue to turn over, people move homes and residences, I think that we're going to continue, maybe not to see an Uncle Jimmy collection, maybe not to see a beer box find, but you never know what's out there. I'm definitely going to be bidding on the T206 Piedmont shipping case. I don't think I'm going to win, and I think it's going to sell for an incredible amount of money. I don't know if you saw, Rich, but I was proud to see that the 1935 Gaudi uncut sheet fine that walked into Fanatics Fest, that we collaborated on that story. So that story has now just been put out on SportsIllustrated.com's website just the other day.
Great, yeah.
And similar to kind of, I think, the sentiment you were sharing just a few minutes ago, folks really enjoy reading about these treasures that are found kind of like out in the wild.
Yeah, I think it's everybody who's a collector has that dream. Maybe we've never found an Uncle Jimmy collection or a Gaudi uncut sheet, but you never know what garage sale you go to or what estate sale you go to, or if you're a really active and aggressive kind of dealer, what kind of a deal is going to walk into your shop or walk into your life through an email. So that's what gets a lot of collectors what gets a lot of dealers and guys who sell vintage cards out of bed in the morning, is the fact that you never know who's going to call. You never know who's going to come up with something. As time goes on, I think maybe some of those finds that we see will be a little more modern, but there's still and we not necessarily junk wax. I think there's still valuable cards hidden in collections that are fairly modern. LeBron James, maybe you collected in the early 2000s and you bought some really nice higher quality packs of cards, and then you lost interest in it, and a couple of years later, and maybe there's some expensive LeBron James cards sitting in shoeboxes somewhere. That's what we'll see in the years to come. Maybe not quite so much early 19th century stuff.
It's a great point, Rich. I fancy myself a professional card treasure hunter, and I agree with you. In 10 years from now, it may look a little bit different, the landscape. That being said, make sure you tune in, folks, to next week's episode of Trading Card Therapy. I have a package of vintage, ungraded cards coming in from Canada later this week. That's all I'll say. And I'll also add, they were 5.5 hours away from the closest airport, which is why they decided to ship. So I'll keep everyone posted on that. Make sure you stay tuned. So, Rich, I have one or two more questions for you. The one that comes to mind, and I wanted to ask you this for a while. I've never asked you this before. But if I said to you, Rich, you are granted one more interview with any single hobby person, living or dead, that you would like to interview, who would you choose and why?
Wow, that's a good question. There's a lot of names that pop into my head. I guess the first one that would probably have to be Jefferson Burdick, the father of the American card catalog, which is what we all kind of have gone by over the years for all the different sets. He was the one who put it in organized form, and he was a pure collector. This was a guy who was not at all really interested in value, and at the time he was alive, there really wasn't a lot of value. Maybe later in life, people were buying a little bit, but for the most part, he was just a guy who wanted to chronicle trading cards, and it wasn't just sports; he was doing everything. But he was just a fanatic about it. Unfortunately, had some health issues and probably passed away a little earlier than he should have. But really interesting, quirky kind of guy. And back then, it was just all guys writing letters to each other. And exchanging information, and he wrote this catalog, which was a groundbreaking thing that helped a lot of collectors in those early days. But I'd like to just ask him about, where he found cards and why he decided to write the card catalog, and how many collectors he thought were really active, how many people that he was communicating with, and some of his great finds that he came up with, because I'm sure there were many back at the time when he was collecting that. Cards had little or no value at all, and he would probably go and snap them up at garage sales and estate sales and flea market, and whatever passed for a flea market back then. And maybe in old stores that were still in existence, in the back room they had a box of cards. I would just love to ask him about how he accumulated his cards and the stories that he has or had.
Oh, Rich, I think it's a great answer. I concur. I would say if I wasn't going to choose an individual, and I think it's kind of fun to think about, if there was a moment in time where I'd like to be, let's say, involved in the conversation, I think that for the time period, it was revolutionary, even all these years later. It is the first epic card set in the entire hobby. Can you imagine being on the ground floor of the cigarette manufacturers and marketing company at the time of about 1910, planning this epic, because it was epic. They produced millions of T206s. I mean, Rich, just to be, I'm getting the goosebumps again, just to be a fly on the wall. You're like, who are we going to get in there? Some guy named Cobb? Give him 4 cards, right? Christy Mathewson, he's only a pitcher. Only give him 3. You know what I mean? Like, listen, of course, I'm just total conjecture and having some fun here. But, like, right, the rhyme or reason on some of these, Hal Chase has 4 cards. I mean, it's kind of wild, right?
And the process of putting it together at that time had to be challenging. It wasn't new, to use cards as a marketing device or a bonus in packages, because they go back to the 19th century with Allen and Ginter and Goodwin Champions, and all that stuff. Never
at that level.
Yeah, but never like this. No, this was just I don't know. How many states, that's another thing that would be fun to ask them is how many states did they ship their product to? Obviously, it was a lot of Virginia, North Carolina, but, you see cigarettes up and down the East Coast. But, what was their distribution network?
Sure. Rich, what about, was there, like with Topps, was there a presentation set?
Yeah.
Is there legitimately a mint, like in the vault, never circulated T206 set? The set that started it all from the print. I mean, probably not, but once again, really, really fun to discuss this. And I mean, I can't believe, Rich, we've been chatting here for almost about 45 minutes or so. I feel like I could chat with you for another 4.5 hours. I'm not going to do that to your family.
Hey, there's nobody here. Story of my life. There's nobody here. No, my wife's dog training right now.
Yeah, I would say probably taking care of the dogs, which I know we're both very fond of.
The one thing I'd like to do too is to talk with Hannes Wagner about what the deal was with. I mean, we kind of know it was, he just didn't.
It was something. It was definitely
something. There was was there a money factor, or was it just, I don't want kids to have to hang around cigarette shops to get my card, and because that was a pretty significant thing for him just to say no, I don't want part of that, because he was really. We don't really know what happened with Eddie Plank and why his card is whether it was something similar to that or whatever, why his card is so tough. But pretty much everybody else, just whether they had a chance to go along with it or whether they were just kind of thrown in there, we don't know back at the time. But it was fun. It would be fun to talk to Hannes. You'd probably want to catch him before 1950 because he probably may have forgotten about it at that time. But I would like to have that conversation with him about 1999. It's like,
so would I very much. Now, folks, if you have an opinion as to what happened with the T206, very famous Hannes Wagner card, let us know in the comments. Rich, I wanted to thank you so much for joining me today. I feel like I said we could easily do another, several episodes. We're going to spare our audience today. I hope everyone enjoyed. Rich, couple things here to close with. Number one, do yourself a favor, go through your material. Let's do a trade. Think about all the things you don't want. Pick out something from my Just Collect eBay store. I'd be happy to make a trade with you. And speaking of my eBay store, as a little thank you to your community, you can figure out how you're going to administer it on your website or Facebook, etc. But Rich, our eBay store is found at just_collect on eBay, and I'm going to give 2 spending sprees of $250 each to 2 users and watchers and readers and fans of sportscollectorsdaily.com. The only way to win these 2 $250 spending sprees to Just Collect will be through sportscollectorsdaily.com, Rich. So you have now been given the power.
Wow.
Right? You've been now given the ring as to decide how to do it. We'll, of course, communicate it offline. And, folks, if you want to know where to find the voice of the hobby, Rich Mueller, every day, go to sportscollectorsdaily.com. Thank you so much, Rich.
Hey, glad to do it late anytime. It's always fun, and we'll do it again soon.
Absolutely. Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family.
You as well.
Thank you. All right, folks, I hope you enjoyed Rich Mueller and our discussion about his website that covers all things sports collectibles. You can find it at sportscollectorsdaily.com. I hope you are able to slow things down in your life take a moment with the Thanksgiving holiday coming upon us to just take a deep breath and appreciate each and every single blessing that you have in your life. I hope you have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanks, everybody. Until next time.